In this lecture that I'm going to call Introduction to Forensics, a Historical Overview, you're going to use it for the assignment in this checkpoint that talks about using the outline method of note-taking. So based upon this lecture, you're going to take notes following the outline method. So let's go ahead and go through it. So basically, again, the definition of forensics, one of which can be, is simply the application of science to those criminal and civil laws that are enforced by police agencies in our criminal justice system. Forensics involves various groups of science. It's an applied science. It is often called criminalistics. That would also be an acceptable name for this course. And we use the disciplines in science of chemistry, biology, physics, geology, all of which combine to look at this and apply to the civil and criminal laws of our system. So it's where science is incorporated into our legal system, is how I always look at this. And it allows us to place physical evidence into a professional discipline. So what we're going to look at, and this is what is important, that was mostly an introduction, but what this is going to talk about is our historical development. I've always think it's important to look at history as to how things developed, especially in the sciences. We tend to forget who contributed to what. So your job is to take using an outline method to outline these notes here on the historical development. Our first individual we're going to look at is an author. His name is Sir Arthur Conan Doyle. You may have heard of his fictional character called Sherlock Holmes. I think the latest movie I've seen of it is Robert Downey Jr. portrayed him. What Conan Doyle did was he was able to popularize the idea of physical detection methods in crime scene evaluations. He is very famous for using the term deductive reasoning, figuring things out. And again, he used his character here by the name of Sherlock. And if you want to, you can read through this scene in a book that he published in 1887 called The Study in Scarlet. But the important point is here at the bottom that says he had a considerable influence on popularizing scientific crime detection methods, even though it was all fiction. And he wrote multiple books. You could Google him and see how many different Sherlock Holmes books there are. Movies have been made of Sherlock Holmes, etc. And knock yourself out if you want to go down and investigate that. Our next person is Matthew Orfila, if I'm pronouncing that correctly. He lived between 1787 and 1853. Here's a portrait of him. He is considered the father of forensic toxicology. He wrote a book they refer to as the Treatise on the Detection of Poisons and their Effects on Animals. So he was the first to start to investigate death based upon poisons. And he basically had to do it by poisoning a lot of animals and seeing how they died, and then seeing if that death matched up to somebody's with that. So he is the father of this field called toxicology. Now we have chemical analysis that can determine what somebody may have consumed. But in his day, they didn't really have it. They had to look at the manner of death. Alphonse Bertillon, or Bertillon, if it's pronouncing it in the French, he developed and looked at what we call criminal detection. He was the first to develop a scientific system for personal identification using body measurements, and we refer to that as anthropometry. He did so in 1879, and what he looked at is things like proportion, that the length of your index finger from the mid-digit to the tip is also the same as the length of your nose. Try it out and see if it works. That the width of your eyes are equally spaced. So if you take the width of one eye and use it, you will have one eye width between two eyes. And that was able to do some reconstruction of decomposed bodies. Francis Galton, 1822 to 1811, was the actual first person to start to look at fingerprints and the fact that they can be used as identifying characteristics, since everybody would have a unique fingerprint. Fingerprints are probably the first line of evidence that a forensic scene will try to figure out. So he wrote a whole book referred to as the treatise entitled Fingerprints, that talks about all of the characteristics. And as you have seen in our vocabulary, we'll be looking at a lot of characteristics of fingerprinting and how to detect them. Leone Lattes, or Lattes, if it's French, he was the first person to determine blood types, our common ABO blood typing groups, and the percentages, and how to detect them using a chemical analysis. I do this in my biology class that I teach. We do a blood typing. I would love to do it this year with you guys because it's always fun. I always enjoy poking students' fingers and them analyzing their blood type. But unfortunately, with COVID restrictions this year, that is just not going to happen. But we do have fake blood that we can, I can purchase, and I actually have some, that we could do an analysis using fake blood, but it's always more fun to analyze your own blood to see what your actual blood type is if you didn't know. Unfortunately, COVID has reared its ugly head in that respect, so that lab, unfortunately, is out. Calvin Goddard, he was the first, if you notice the image here, these are bullets, to determine that when using microscopes, you can compare the ballistics of a bullet. He looked at tool marks that the barrel of the gun actually produced on a bullet to determine whether or not this was the firearm that was used to commit a crime. And he's kind of the father of ballistic science in the forensics field. And again, notice this was in probably the early 1900s that he did this. Albert Osborn. What Osborn did is he looked at the principles of what we call document examination. So it was the allowing documents to become evidence in forensic cases. That could be all sorts of different written documents that a criminal may have produced that can then be brought into a court and looked at as evidence. Edmond Leconte, he demonstrated how the principles developed by Hans Gross could be incorporated into a workable crime lab. And what Leconte's exchange principle states that once contact is made between two surfaces, a transfer of materials will occur. That was pretty groundbreaking, that you could actually touch a surface and leave evidence from your body. We know that today as DNA. Of course, we know that also today surface contact is, a form of transfer of the coronavirus. Hence, we're going to be cleaning in here before you guys leave, and so that the next group coming in doesn't pick up anything that you may have left behind. But Leconte, was probably the first person to actually create this principle here. So that is just kind of a quick overview of contributions that were made to the field of forensic scientists in a historical sense, who first developed the fingerprints, who first developed the ballistics, etc. Your job is to now create an outline note-taking method. It's a method of note-taking that we're going to use, or you can use. We're going to talk about many different forms of note-taking, and for each form, I will have a lecture that you will then create a note based upon that form. In the outline form, as you will find on your OneNote page here that says Outline Method, is basically an overview of what outlines look like. What you will do on the assignment page, so you got to make sure you're on the right pages so when I go to look for it, I can find it. What you're going to do for the assignment is, using those notes, you can either do one of two things. It's up to you. You can actually, on that OneNote page, click below and just type out the notes in an outline format. The thing about OneNote is it tends to put everything in outline format, so it's really easy to do. As you can see in my directions here, OneNote automatically numbered, and when I indented, did the ABC function. OneNote is an outline method process. Or if you prefer, because some people do, you can actually write them out on a piece of paper. Now, for me to grade, because of the coronavirus, I can't accept any paper, physical paper that you will turn into me, because I am not allowed to touch it. Because again, we have that contact, touching, and transfer issue. So what you will do if you choose to do work on paper, which later you probably will do when we talk about the mapping type of method of note-taking, because it's hard to do on a computer. What you have to do is do it on paper. Make sure your name is clearly visible at either the top, bottom, or side, or all four places. I would prefer all four, actually. And then you will photograph it. You can use your device to photograph it, or you can use a phone to photograph it. And then you will insert that photograph, as we did with other pictures, right below. So when I open it up, I will just see this large photograph, and you need the largest possible photograph, or I can't read what you've written. And then I'll simply grade it on your OneNote page. So just to reiterate here, you can either take notes right here directly on OneNote from the lecture, either from me talking through it as I am now, or you can just read the printout, or you can actually write them down and then photograph it and insert it here. You will note that in this checkpoint, it is huge. There are several different assignments you must complete before you can actually submit it. And there will be based upon the instructions that I gave you earlier, a check-off list. Like, I've done this, and now I can submit the checkpoint. So this is actually the second assignment of, I believe, 5 that you have to complete before this checkpoint can be turned in. So good luck, and then when you're finished with this, you can move on to the next note-taking strategy with the lecture that I provide you for that.